For analysis, we turn now to Dr. Frank Romano. He's the author of the book Love and Terror in the Middle East, as well as a professor of comparative law and history at the University of Paris. Dr. Romano, welcome to Arise America. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
That I know of, this is the first such mass killing conducted by the so-called Islamic State outside of their so-called caliphate in Syria and Iraq. What can you lay a foundation for us of what's going on in Libya to allow something like this to happen?
Well, first of all, just apparently after the leader of ISIS declared pretty much war against Europeans, there was an attack by an ISIS-related group in Algeria in 2014, September. But this is one of the first, and you're absolutely right. What's happening? First of all, Egypt displaced Morsi, an Islamist leader, and from that period on, a year and a half ago, it's been fuming. The militants have been fuming and going over the border into Libya. They're not sure whether these particular, and getting arms and receiving arms and returning to Egypt to fight the government, to fight Sisi, who is now the general in charge of Egypt. I don't think they've established a connection between ISIS factions, because there are extremist factions in Libya, but there might be. There are at least 3 extremist groups in Libya that are connected to ISIS and growing.
Is this related at all, if you will, and I think I know the answer to this, but I want you to unpack it a little bit, about the instability that has been happening and spiraling in Libya since the fall of the Gaddafi regime in 2011?
Yeah, I think this is the KO for instability. It's been unstable for a long time, since the fall of Gaddafi. The KO is now ISIS comes in, and it's already unstable. But ISIS, we have to keep in mind, has an ulterior motive here. What's happening now, I think, which is not hitting mainstream news, and it might be one of the first that addresses this issue, ISIS is goading the U.S. into participating militarily, soldiers or more closely militarily, because the more the U.S. declares it's going to participate militarily, that is, say, with arms, in some of these unstable areas where ISIS is operating, the more recruits they make, and the more money they make from contributions.
I don't know how likely that is that U.S. will dedicate those ground troops, although we seem to be inching forward in that regard. However, Egypt says they don't want to commit ground troops to this either.
Well, that's right, and it's the same issue. The more they want to commit ground troops, the more the Islamist faction in Egypt, it's fodder for more recruiting, showing that Egypt is just an instrument of the U.S. It's really this vicious cycle, and I think we need to break this. The United States need to break the cycle and not getting sucked into these very controversial, very delicate quagmires, and we saw the result in Iraq and Vietnam War. We need to make a stand here and not be so defensive, maybe help our allies, but not get militarily involved.
And what's at risk here for Egypt, Dr. Romano, I mean, beside the geographic juxtaposition?
You know, the risk is Egypt has a very delicate security issue, as we said before. More specifically, what is that? After opposing the Islamist group, the Muslim Brotherhood, there's been organizing, a great deal of organizing going on in Egypt. Now, President Sisi has been able to resist up to this point. But now with the involvement of ISIS, and ISIS factions, and the cruelty and the recruiting, this could really distort the balance. There's not much of a balance there now with extremists involved in Egypt, but Sisi sort of has control. With ISIS, this could create a domino effect that we saw during the Arab Spring.
Can you look back and point to any specific event that perhaps could have telescoped this? There was a bombing, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, another bombing by Egyptian forces in Libya last summer.
Absolutely.
How are these connected?
Well, I'll go farther back. I would say that the connection is way back. It goes farther back from the bombing by the Egypt. This is a second bombing of Islamist factions in Libya. It goes all the way back to Syria when the United States failed to help the non-Islamist Syrians. Since that point, 2 years ago, now we declare we should help them. It's hard to find them because they've had to align with one extremist group or another. They couldn't stand alone. This has developed. It's gone out of proportion, and it's hitting all the other countries now where ISIS is involved, because I believe we didn't take a very strong stance, not sending soldiers on the ground, but support to the non-Islamist groups in Syria and perhaps Iraq and other parts of the world. And we see part of this is, I think, a lack of American initiative. It goes far back. It goes farther back than the bombing last summer.
I want you to talk more then about those global implications of this.
Yes. And the global implication of what's happening now, what happened in Syria, what's happened in Syria and then Egypt and of course Libya, which we're addressing today, The 12 Christians, I believe, beheaded, I think it wasn't by chance that they chose Christians. Now, ISIS has been, they've been choosing, non-Sunnite Muslims,
yes,
or Yazidis that are not even Muslims first. And why Christians? I think, to me, it's a clear provocation, and I will underline my theory that it's to provoke, it's really to goad the U.S. more. It's right now that Congress is trying to decide how far the United States is going to provide help for these countries fighting ISIS, whether it could be just Syria, Iraq, or other linked countries. And it just so happens now they beheaded 12 Christians. Most Americans are Christian. And, with the Congress getting emotional, I think it's a strategy, and I think it's a clever one, and it should be identified and faced directly by the government.
Well, how effective of a strategy is it then, do you think?
On the short term, it could be very effective. On the long term, I think ISIS, just like, I work in Palestine, and a lot of the Palestinians, when they got involved in the suicide bombing, even though they were desperate, I'm not justifying it, I realize now that that's not very effective because it brought the world down on them and it hurt the movement. Short term, I think they're getting converts, especially if the U.S. is involved. Long term, with the cruelties and with of course, the resistance going to have to get going, or they'll just pretty well take over these areas. Long term, I think they're going to hurt themselves with these cruel actions, but they are gaining recruits in the short term.
Yes, very disturbing expansion.
Yes, it is very
disturbing.
Now.
We'll leave it right there for now, Dr. Frank Romano. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.